The boy put the shot through the copper coin at 60 yards, and the coin spun up into the October air and caught the light before it fell. Willow Fork Trading Post sat near a bend in the Cimarron, where the cottonwood trees grew tall enough to give shade in summer and skeletal enough in autumn to offer nothing at all. Old Marianne Fetch ran it, had run it for 11 years, kept a ledger that nobody questioned, and a shotgun behind the flour bin that everybody knew about. People came through who were moving west. People came through who were moving nowhere but needed supplies to stay still. And people came through to trade. Hides, horses, information, quiet. It was one of those places the territory made, where two worlds reached across a counter and worked out what they each had and what they each needed. Rourke had been working security here since July. It was a job that suited him. Not much talking, clear enough expectations. He knew what he was owed and what he owed in return, and that was the whole of it. He was standing outside the post's east wall that Wednesday morning, cup of coffee going cold in his hand, watching the boy at the flat stone range who had borrowed somebody's revolver without asking and was doing something with it that shouldn't have been possible on the first try. The coin, Rourke's coin, from his shirt pocket where he kept it out of old habit, was turning in the air 100 yards distant. The boy lowered the gun and looked back at Rourke. He was maybe 16, lean and fast-looking, with dark eyes that held the shot's aftermath without any pride in them. Just recording. That was the first thing Rourke noticed. No pride. Pride is the enemy of precision, and this boy already knew it without being told. The boy's name was Tohono. His sister worked behind the counter Tuesdays and Thursdays. Rourke had exchanged maybe 40 words with Suri Kashkawa in the 3 months he'd been here. She was efficient, bilingual, and careful with people the way a careful person is when they've learned that being careless around strangers costs something. Tohono came to the post to see her, the way younger brothers do, and had ended up sitting on the step outside watching Rourke the way you watch a hawk when you're not quite sure what it's doing. Rourke crossed to the range and took the revolver from the boy without preamble. He checked the cylinder. 1 round spent. He handed it back.
Yes. Until next time.
Tohono told him. A friend's, borrowed. He had watched Rourke practice in the early mornings, seen the way Rourke moved the gun, the economy of it, no wasted gesture, and had been working out the mechanics in his head for weeks. He wanted to learn. Rourke looked at him for a moment. Then he said, no. He said it without meanness. He said it the way you say no when you mean no and you've thought about it clearly. Simply, with no door left ajar for argument. What he knew was his own, earned across years and hard country, paid for in ways he didn't discuss. He wasn't a teacher. He had no arrangement with this boy or this boy's family. He took his coin from the dry grass where it had fallen, polished it once against his coat, and put it back in his shirt pocket. Then he went back inside. The thing about a trade post is that most of the real transactions aren't the ones written in the ledger. Old Marianne knew this. The notation of exchange, pelts for grain, credit for ammunition, that was the surface. Beneath it, the post kept track of everything else. Who owed whom, who was watching whom, who came in with a straight back and left with a different one. Rourke had been reading the room for 3 months, and he read it well. He knew Suri was watching him the way her brother did, recording, assessing, making no conclusions he could detect. He respected that, the way you respect a river whose depth you can't read from the surface. He knew he'd said no to the boy for the right reasons. He was sure of it. A man who gives away what he knows is a smaller man for the giving. He'd watched teachers, real teachers, the formal kind, and he'd always thought the arrangement seemed like a losing trade. You pour out what you've accumulated and you end up lighter, less. The boy would learn from someone eventually, not Rourke's problem.
Willow Fork is just ahead.
The next morning, Thursday, when Rourke came out to start his rounds at first light, Tohono was sitting on the post step, not asking anything, not saying anything. He had his hands around his knees and he was watching the cottonwood tree lose a leaf, one yellow leaf that spiraled down in the cold air and touched the dirt. He looked at Rourke when Rourke came out, and there was no urgency in it, no entreaty. He looked the way someone looks when they have all morning and know it. Rourke looked back at him. He hadn't said yes. He hadn't changed anything. He just looked at the boy sitting there, patient as the cottonwood, and went on with his rounds. But he noticed that his coffee this morning tasted exactly like a question he hadn't answered yet.
The boy, he's got a kind of attention that's worth teaching into.
Rourke started the first lesson 3 days later, on a Sunday when the post was quiet. He said nothing about it, no formal agreement, no acknowledged change of position. He simply walked past Tohono where the boy sat on the step and said, loud enough to hear but not looking back, "Flat Stone Range, 20 minutes."
Something that belongs to someone else, and you haven't given it yet.
He wasn't going to discuss why. He'd decided without deciding, the way you sometimes do when a thing keeps sitting in front of you with the patience of a weather system. The boy's patience had been the argument Rourke couldn't counter. Not sentiment, not sympathy, just the recognition that a person who wants to learn badly enough to wait quietly for 3 days in October cold has already demonstrated the first discipline. Everything else is mechanics. The mechanics, it turned out, the boy had largely taught himself. This was the thing that surprised Rourke. He'd expected to start from the beginning, hand position, sight line, breath, and instead found Tohono had already worked out most of it by watching. What he lacked was the refinement that comes from 1,000 repetitions and someone who can tell you exactly where you're wasting motion. So that's what Rourke gave him. Not wisdom, not philosophy, just precision. Where to put your weight, when to exhale, how to make the gun feel like an extension of your purpose rather than a separate piece of equipment. The Flat Stone Range in October light, limestone warm under their boots, the air so dry it cracked at the lips. They worked an hour without unnecessary speech, and the quality of that hour, the concentration in it, the shared seriousness, had a texture Rourke recognized without naming.
Don't grip it hard. You hold it hard and it knows you're uncertain. Hold it the way you hold something you trust not to leave.
Tohono adjusted his grip and put the next shot center. He didn't look back for approval, he just reset.
Ready for the next level. The wind comes over the south stone here just barely.
They went on like that for 2 weeks. Daily sessions when Rourke wasn't needed at the post, Sundays and early mornings. Old Mary Ann noticed. She noticed everything, but said nothing. She wrote something small in the margin of her ledger that Rourke didn't ask about. Suri, when she was at the post, would bring Tohono water and set it on the fence post at the range's edge without interrupting. Rourke noticed she watched the lessons with the same recording attention her brother used. He found that he didn't mind. The third week, Suri asked him something at the counter. She asked if he'd be willing to ride to Sand Creek Bend and speak with her uncle Chayton, who wanted to understand what arrangement this was. It was a fair request. Rourke was teaching someone else's nephew on the edge of someone else's territory, and nobody had been formally asked. He should have thought of that himself. He rode out Tuesday morning. Suri rode beside him on a brown horse that knew the way by itself, and she talked about the camp the way someone talks about a place they're proud of and careful with, giving him just enough to be respectful when he arrived, not so much that he wouldn't have to pay attention when he got there.
My uncle doesn't speak much English. He'll hear what you say and I'll translate. He'll tell you what he thinks and I'll translate that too. He may not say everything he thinks. That's his right.
Sand Creek Bend smelled of sage smoke and boiling corn and the particular clean smell of willow water. Dogs came to the edge of camp and assessed Rourke and decided he was tolerable. Children watched from doorways. Chayton was a man in his 60s, deliberate in movement, with eyes that had the quality of water that runs deep and clear. You could see a long way in and not find the bottom. He sat outside his lodge and gestured for Rourke to sit, and they sat together in the thin October sun while Surrey took her position slightly behind and between them. Chayton spoke for a while. His voice was low, unhurried. Surrey translated. He wanted to know what Rourke was getting out of it, what the exchange was, what the ledger entry looked like on Rourke's side of the counter. It was a better question than most people thought to ask.
He says our lands have been mine, but we must leave by
He says you carry something that belongs to someone
Chayton
else.
listened to Surrey's translation.
That's what he sees.
He said something else, shorter, quieter. Surrey paused. She paused for a noticeable moment before translating. Rourke waited.
He says, you carry something that belongs to someone else, and you haven't given it yet. He says that's what he sees in you. He says Tohono can stay in the lessons.
Rourke rode back to the post that afternoon, turning that over. He didn't know what Chayton meant by it. He thought maybe he did.
Nothing you need, Lassiter.
Beaumont Lassiter arrived the following Friday in a heavy wagon, 2 men riding behind, and took his usual spot at the counter for 20 minutes of buying nothing in particular while he watched the room. Lassiter was a man who took the measure of everything he saw, not because he was intelligent, but because he was thorough, and thoroughness without wisdom is its own kind of danger. He knew Rourke from the summer's supply negotiations. He had the easy confidence of a man who has never been wrong about what something costs. He waited until old Marianne stepped into the back before he slid a folded paper across the counter. Rourke's name was written on the front in Lassiter's cramped hand.
Take your time. Very generous offer, considering the circumstances. You think this is enough?
Rourke looked at the paper on the counter. He did not touch it yet. What was on the paper was simple enough. Lassiter wanted Tohono for his freight operation, a runner, a fast rider who knew both sides of the territory line and could move between them without drawing attention. He'd been watching the boy since summer, before the lessons, and the lessons had made him more useful. This was stated plainly. Lassiter didn't dress up what he was. He also wanted Rourke gone. Not because Rourke was a threat to him, Lassiter had no reason to fear Rourke's skill, but because a man with Rourke's kind of reputation asked questions at inopportune moments. Not loud questions, just the kind a man asks when he's been watching a post long enough to notice what passes through and when. Lassiter's freight operation did not benefit from that kind of noticing. He was willing to pay Rourke fairly for an agreement to be gone by first frost. Fair payment, simple accounting. Rourke read the paper 3 times. Then he put it flat on the counter and thought about the ledger on his side. What Lassiter was offering Tohono wasn't skill. It was servitude dressed in commerce language. The boy would be running freight between supply posts and reservation settlements for a man who'd built his operation on the assumption that people in constrained circumstances couldn't negotiate their own terms. Chayton would be told it was an opportunity. Maybe Chayton would see through that. Maybe he wouldn't. Lassiter was very good at the presentation. Rourke knew what needed to happen. He also knew what it was going to cost him.
The wind comes off the limestone here, just like this. See the drift? Yes, I see. Always to the left, you're going.
Lassiter wrote it down. He seemed faintly surprised that the negotiation had been that clean. Most people in Rourke's position either pushed back or folded. Rourke had done neither. He'd just recalculated, fast and visible. Lassiter respected that, in the way a man respects a sharp tool he didn't expect to find.
What happens next? Now it's your turn.
Rourke had 3 weeks before the first frost on average, and 3 weeks was enough to finish what he'd started. He told Tohono nothing about the arrangement. He came to the flat stone range each morning and worked with the same patience he'd always brought, maybe more. There was something in him that had loosened. The quality of the teaching changed. He stopped being sparing with what he knew. He gave everything, the way you give things you're not going to need much longer. Tohono noticed the shift. He said nothing about it, in the way he said nothing about most things, but he came earlier and stayed later. The lessons had become something else, not just instruction, but exchange. The boy would show Rourke something about the ground, about how to read the October wind off the limestone for drift that Rourke hadn't known before. A kind of teaching went in both directions now, and Rourke found that lighter than he'd expected. Not smaller, lighter. One morning at the range, Rourke reached into his shirt pocket and brought out the copper coin. He set it on the fence post at 60 yards. Tohono looked at it, then at Rourke.
That belonged to my brother. He carried it through the war, and I've been carrying it since. I've been using it as a target because I didn't know what else to do with it.
Tohono was quiet for a moment.
And now?
The boy put the shot through the coin at 60 yards and didn't miss. The coin turned in the air the way it had the first morning, caught the last of the October light, the way things do just before they land. Rourke watched it fall and felt the pocket where he'd carried it these 8 years, empty now, lighter, and he understood what Chayton had seen in him that afternoon at Sand Creek Bend. The thing he'd been carrying that belonged to someone else. He'd been teaching it out of himself this whole time, and he hadn't known that's what the lessons were. He gave Tohono the coin where it lay in the brown grass, told him to carry it careful, said without saying everything that the boy knew enough to go the rest of the way himself. Tohono looked at him for a moment, recording as always, and nodded once. Then he put the coin in his own pocket, and they walked back toward the post in the gray late afternoon. That evening, Rourke pulled his travel pack from under the bunk and began setting things inside it. The work had the practiced efficiency of a man who'd packed and left before, enough times that the motions were familiar. He was doing it when Surrey came into the back room with an inventory sheet for old Mary Ann and saw him at it. She didn't say anything for a moment. She set the inventory sheet on the crate by the door and looked at him packing, and there was something in her face that Rourke recognized, the same thing the paused translation had held at Sand Creek Bend, an assessment, something she'd been working out for a while. He told her. She didn't look away. He wished she had. He rode out the next morning before the post opened. The sky was that particular gray that comes before October sun, flat and clear, the kind that makes distances larger. The cottonwood behind the post had dropped most of its leaves in the night. They were on the ground in a yellow ring around the base, and the tree stood bare above them, unmistakable in shape, easy to find. He didn't look back at it for long. The trade post intermediary knows one thing about a fair exchange: what both sides walk away with. Rourke had given everything he had to give and received what he'd given in the only form such things travel, in the hands of someone who would use it and carry it forward, and maybe give it in turn someday to someone who was sitting patient on a step in October cold and not asking for anything yet. What he walked away with was harder to write in the ledger. He walked away with an empty pocket where the coin had been, the memory of a clean shot in the October air, and the weight of a question he'd been asked at a counter in a post on the Cimarron that he'd answered the only way he honestly could. He had told the truth. That was what he'd walked away with. The post step was empty that morning. The cottonwood stood bare over the yellow ring of what it had given up. The grass along the Cimarron went on for a long way. Long enough that a rider becomes a small, dark figure before he disappears entirely. Long enough for the land to hold the shape of someone for a while after they're gone.